Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the 5th chapter in the book of Mark. We're going to make it all the way through the first 20 verses here, and we read of a demon-possessed man and an exorcism, and this was no ordinary exorcism. The man who was afflicted, we read, had a whole legion of demons, which would have been anywhere from 5,000 to 6,000. So elsewhere we read that Mary Magdalene had 7 demons in her. So it is possible to be possessed and controlled by more than one demon at once. So we just want to gather the intensity of the slavery that this man was in. He was totally possessed. He had an army of demons, and demons are Satan's minions working on his behalf. And the Savior had a lot of people think he only battled him at the temptation, but he battled him the entire way through his ministry. So, we witness him battling him in the synagogues and everywhere else. And what happens in the chapter leading up to him is he teaches through parables. I did one on that. You can type in Corey Johnston, Mark 4, 1 through 34 on the YouTube search engine if you're curious on that. And then what I didn't cover in that lesson is the sea storm. So they're on the Sea of Galilee. Galilee was the center of his ministerial operations. Mark established the trajectory that would be followed by the other two synoptic authors, Matthew and Luke, of a ministry beginning in Galilee and leading to Jerusalem and culminating on the cross, whereas John presents his as in his Judean ministry. But what's most important here is that they were on a boat and there was an intense physical storm. This was a storm beyond proportions. I personally believe it was sent by Satan to cause the disciples to fear and panic because they thought they were goners, and they questioned how this man could sleep when they were in the midst of such a horrifying storm. There was clearly something supernatural here, and he woke up, put his head over, and said, "Peace, be still," and like that it was gone. So when Satan and God are not evenly matched, and we witness that all these demons surrender to him. So the demons believe in God, they tremble before him. They are not atheists, they are orthodox. They know God is, they know he exists, and they know his power, and they submit when they have a direct confrontation with it. And of course, God and Satan are at war, their followers are at war, their kingdoms are at war. So we who become Christians are engaged in the same struggle that he was, but in his power we can overcome it. But demon possession is, a lot of people say, does that even go around today? And yes, absolutely, because half of our medical patients in the United States of America are in there for mental health. And, there's no exact science or universal formula for why they're in there. Some of it's psychiatric imbalance, but many, not most of them, but I will say many of them are demon-possessed, and the details of demon possess are extreme, and we'll probably touch on that, and we'll try and connect it to the modern day as much as we can while we read the passage. So we're going to begin with the opening verse, which reads, "And they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes." So they're on one side of the Sea of Galilee. The territory of Galilee surrounded the sea, and then they were on the other. So when they were en route, that's when this tremendous storm came and was instantly stilled. And the final question they have is that, who is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? So they still did not know quite who this man was. They did not know he was the living son of Elohim quite yet. They just knew he was, there was something extraordinary about him, and supernaturally so. But he was able to do these things because his and the Father's power were one and the same. "And when he came out of the boat, immediately there met out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit." Immediately is a word we read 41 times in the Gospel of Mark. His is an action-oriented gospel, so there's a sense of urgency about it, and we often find that term immediately. So as soon as he set foot on the shore, there came a man. In Matthew's version, it's two. In Mark's and Luke's, it's a single man, and he had an unclean spirit. He qualifies that it's at Gadarenes in the opening verse, "who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one was able to bind him, not even with chains, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces, and no one was able to tame him. So we have a man who is indistinct from a wild beast, and so he cannot be contained, he cannot be controlled. He is dwelling among the tombs because he's so demon possessed that he's going to be at home in death, because the wages of sin and the wages of following Satan are death. So he's in his natural environment. He's away from society. Society can only chain him there, and he breaks through it, but he's just content to remain there. And there's three kind of perspectives I want to appreciate as this unfolds. One is what Satan does to people. So he possesses them through his demons. Demon possession demons are destructive forces which can rob one of their sanity or self-control. And I have seen evidence of it in the world, filmed evidence of, it's definitely out there. And what society does to these people, and, more the outcasts, the criminals, they kind of shun them away, isolate them from society, and don't leave them to their own selves. So, that's the way of society that shuns them away. But the Savior is the perspective I really want us to lay hold of, is to step into unclean territory. The Savior was not shy to do this, as many of his Pharisaical antagonists were. They were so obsessed with the ritualistic cleanliness that they would not minister to sinful people and outcasts, and they certainly wouldn't step foot in a pig pen in a Gentile territory. That's where he is. So he's on the other side of the Galilee Sea. So this man is a Gentile, and there's also pigs there, so he's in Gentile territory. But the Savior's grace is universal, extending first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. Romans 1:16. And continually night and day he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. So this wild beast's own worst enemy is himself. He is deliberately harming and injuring himself because he has no mind of his own. It's been hijacked by a legion of demons. That's how they describe themselves. So we're going to cover the exact number when we read on that path. But this man has no mind of his own, no life of his own, no existence worth living. He is in the tombs, physically injuring himself, all because he is dominated by these demons. So this is an extraordinarily demon-possessed man. And seeing Yahshua from a distance, he ran and bowed down to him. So this immediately happened, but we read in the first or second verse, but then he sees him from a distance, so he came to him, and when he saw them and bowed down to him, so he has this magnetic lure that brings the spiritual forces of darkness to him in submission when he is present and in its midst, and they naturally bow to the superior force because they know they are in the presence of a superior power against whom they have no chance of withstanding or overcoming. And having called out with a loud voice, said, "What have I to do with you, Yahshua, Son of the Most High El? Swear to Elohim not to torture me." So these demons don't want to have anything to do with him. They say, "What do we have to do with this? Just leave us alone. Let us bother this man. Why do you have to come and raid on our parade? We're actually loving every minute that this man is cutting himself and hurting himself, and while he's dwelling in the tombs away from society, living less than like an animal, no mind of his own, no sanity, no self-control." And they know that the party's over when he's up there, so they're asking him not to torture them. So they know that they're hellbound, and they're asking for a little more time because the power in heaven and hell lies in his hands, and he is in their midst. So they ask not to be tortured, and what he does eventually is send them into a herd of pigs who lose their sanity and self-control and run straight over the cliff. We'll get to that when we get to it. For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, unclean spirit." So this is in response. Now he knows that he has to obey because even the storms and all the satanic forces aligned against him in the world submit and obey at the sound of his voice, which carries authority and resonates power. And so he told them to come out, but they said, "Please don't send us to hell." They want to keep going and keep ruining some animal's life, if not a person. And he was asking him, "What is your name?" And he answered, saying, "My name is Legion, because we are many." So a Roman legion was the foundation, or the one of the standard military formulas, consisting of 5,000 to 6,000 men. So there's literally an army of demons in this one single man. Demons are invisible spirits, so they can't. It is possible for that even 1,000 of them, or 5,000, or 6,000, or even 10,000 to occupy a single human at a single time. And but now they know his name and they submit to it. They recognize its authority and its power. But he asks them what their name is, and they say Legion. So they are the one talking through him. That's how demonically dominated this man is. It is his mouth and his lips that are telling him these things. So he has no person, no life to call his own. He is totally controlled by the demons as to be indistinguishable from the force which enslaves him. And he begged him very much that he would not send them out of the country. So that would have been the torture to they want to stay home and keep bothering the next closest person. So they're begging at him. They know they're at his mercy, his control, his wishes, their command, and he's going to tell them what to do, but they're pleading for him. So they are praying. They know he exists, and they squirm before his presence and tremble before the same, and they can only beg to be not sent to hell just yet. And he does, he's merciful in his request. His purpose wasn't to accelerate the final day of judgment, but to liberate and save this man. Because remember what Satan does to demon-possessed people, what society does to demon-possessed people. They lock them up and, keep the key on close watch, if not throw it away. And what the Savior does for them, he restores them to wholeness of life, which allows them to have acceptability in society. Now a great herd of pigs was there, feeding near the mountains. So these pigs would have been unclean animals and forbidden by the Mosaic dietary standards, because they were, they dwell in their own filth. So they, by connection, and their meat was considered filthy and unclean and unfit for a Jewish person to eat. So in order for this to be Jewish territory, this man would not last long, because he would be immediately hounded out. So they were commanded to stay away from that stuff. So we know this is on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. They're in Gentile territory. And all the demons begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, so that we enter into them." So they see, they hear, they know the pigs are there. They're asking to be let loose in them, let them ruin their lives. After all, what worth is the life of a pig compared to a life of a man, even a whole horde of them? And of course, the town, and how they receive this miracle and revelation, is they're more concerned with the loss of revenue from those pigs than they are the fact that this man who had been exiled from their community was now back, restored and sane, and a fully functioning human, no longer controlled by the demons which once enslaved him. And he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered into the pigs. They were about 2,000, and the herd rushed down the steep place into the sea, and drowned in the sea. So they need his permission. Satan cannot attack a saint without Yahweh's permission. We read in the book of Job. So the demons are submissive to Yahshua, and Satan is submissive to Yahweh. And so he gives them the permission, he accommodates their request, and what they do is, these unclean spirits are only fit for unclean animals, so they go in, it's only fitting that an unclean thing dwell in an unclean thing, and that's what they do, and they send them to their immediate death. There are 2,000 of them, so if you do the math, there were about 6,000 of the demons. That averages to about 3 a pig, and that was more than enough to compel these creatures to walk off a cliff to their own certain death. Pigs really don't have mind of their own. They're probably more vulnerable to demonic insanity. But the demons keep living. What does he say in Luke 11? They go to a desert or an arid place, then find no place and come back. So they will try and come back to this man, but he's been restored and made whole, and has no desire to go back to where he came from once being liberated by the Savior. It's pretty much permanent. in 9 out of 10 cases or somewhere thereabouts. And those who fed the pigs fled and reported it in the city and in the country, and they went out to see what had taken place. So the owners of the pig, the employees of the owners of the pigs, they fled and they went everywhere. They didn't tell their master, but they might have en route to the city and the country. They're trying to roar up outrage against this man who had dared stepped in and interrupt their commerce. So their chief concern is financial, and they could not rejoice in the obvious spiritual treasure and gift which had just unfolded before their eyes. They're more concerned about the pigs than the person, so their priorities are way out of whack. And of course, when they see what takes place, when they verify the report by personal observation, they see that the pigs are gone, they are drowned in the sea. They're going to not be too warm and welcoming to this man who had, this itinerant stranger who had rudely stepped in and disrupted their commerce. So they came to Joshua and saw the demon-possessed one, him who had the legion sitting, and dressed, and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Now in other accounts we read that he was naked. Here we don't read that he was naked, but he is fully clothed, and nakedness is a species of insanity for, in a lot of ways. We don't really feel they're necessarily relevant, but nakedness is associated with shame. It has been that way since the days of Eden, and there are such, in our culture today, it seems like almost more movies have at least some nudity in them than those that do not. And of course there's pornography, and there are people who are literally sex obsessed. They cannot think about anything else, and they are demon possessed. That's one species of demon possession, to be able to think of nothing but your carnal lust all the time. That is a severe form of slavery. And in his right mind, so his sanity had been restored whole, and so for all intents and purposes he's a fully functioning human once more. And no one is born demon possessed, one becomes possessed, and you don't become possessed unless you kind of invite themselves in. Some of you may be wondering, demon possession, that's a pretty freaky thing that can happen to, can that happen to me, can that happen today? And yeah, it can, but understand that no one suddenly becomes demon possessed without dabbling with demons in the first place. So we invite them into our lives, and there's only one way out if we or anyone else are demon possessed, and that is the Savior, who the force, the entity to whom the demons squabble and tremble and just are reduced to smithereens. And this causes them to be afraid, because they knew this man was bat crazy, not going to say it, but totally insane. He was cutting himself, he was dwelling in the tombs, he was away. No one could tame him, he could not tame himself. He was living in a degraded existence, and the fact that he had been restored so instantly, so thoroughly, and so totally caused them to be fearful. So there's an amazement of it, but there's also a fear, because what is this power that suddenly made this man do a complete 100% 180-degree U-turn and just be back as if he was never demon, as if a demon had never penetrated him in the first place. And those who saw it related to them what was done to the demon-possessed one, and about the pigs. So them would have been the Savior and the disciples, and also included is the one who had benefited from his ministry. And this man is given evangelical instructions, of which we'll soon read. But in Luke's account, what's interesting is he's so thrilled to be liberated that he asks him to follow him with life to the end. He wants to live his entire life in his presence for the rest of his life, having been liberated from the army, the legion of demons that had reduced him to a species of abject slavery, unfit for any beast. but he tells him to spread the message. So this man was an early Gentile evangelist. He spread the message about who this man was and what he had done as per instructed, but that and they began to plead with him to leave their borders. So they don't want him here because he's bad for business. They don't care about the spiritual salvation or the redemption that this demon-possessed man, who they all kind of knew but ignored and shunned to the sidelines, he wasn't part of their lives or their concerns. So now, is commerce going to cease just because this man has been enslaved by demons and is now uplifted to salvation? We got to pay for that. How does that affect us? And we lose money, and our chief concern is monetary, and we do not care for the spiritual welfare of the one we had cast aside from our society and outcast and ostracized, and wanted nothing to do with now that he was and they especially wanted nothing to do with the one who implemented the miracle, and they got their wish, so he never returned there again. And they got what they wished, and should be careful what you wish for. So they missed his miracle in their midst, and they would never behold one again or experience one. And Yahshua did not allow him, but said to him, "Go." And as he was entering into the boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might be with him. So we mentioned earlier this man's reaction to having a new lease on life was to spend the rest of his life in his sacred presence and to follow him and be with him and be as intimately involved as the apostles and the disciples and the 12 were. But these positions were already filled. So he had his work for him was to spread the news of his own restoration, salvation, and redemption to the friends and family, the ones who had knew him as he once was, the one who had knew who he had become, and the ones who could see him transformed. And Yahshua did not allow him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and report to them what the Master has done for you and how he had compassion on you." So the main thing he's to report is this was a compassion, and alternately translated as mercy in other translations. But in Mark's count especially, we read that a lot of the miracles were motivated by compassion. He sympathizes with us in our humanity, and he does have compassion and sympathy for our weaknesses, our pains, our ails and struggles. There is nothing we have experienced that he has not experienced, and then some. So we do want to bear that in mind when weighing what we've done for him versus what he's done for us, and may we never lose sight of that. And he left and began to proclaim in Decapolis all that Yahshua had done for him, and all marveled. So Decapolis was a region of 10 cities that were founded by Greek Hellenistic people. So Deca translates as 10, that's decade, decathlon, etc. in the English language. So they were 10 towns on a region that was somewhere near this Gentile territory or in it, and the response was marvel. So he did what he was called to do. He did serve as an evangelist. He was not called to be an apostle, but he was called to be an evangelist. And if there's hope for someone like that, there has to be hope for pretty much any one of us. But, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. This is a man who was last and he became first because he's saved. So he's better off than the majority of human history is at this point. And the one thing we just want to repeat and bear in mind and encourage you to do the same is the 3 approaches to demon-possessed people: Satan's, societies, and the saviors. And when we ever endeavor to adopt these saviors, if we ever do, and there are demon-possessed people out there, one not even necessarily look far, one will show up. But that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. So glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Take care until then. Bye-bye.